Welcome to this morning's My Journey series featuring Wong Toon King, or known as TK, as he's popularly known. He's our speaker for today. We are thankful to have a moderator, Denis Edward, with us today. Thank you, Denis, for joining us.
Thank you, Errol, and good morning to all of you, brothers and sisters in Christ. My name is Denis. I'm very, very happy and privileged to be having this conversation with my dear friend and mentor, TK, and also to facilitate the conversation between him and you. So, TK, for those who are just still getting to know you a little bit better, tell us a little bit about your earlier days. Who is this cute little baby over here?
Well, hi, Dennis, and hi, everyone out there. Firstly, thanks for taking the time on this Saturday morning to be with me. As I was preparing for this talk today, I realized this is exactly 10 years since I was baptized with another cute little baby, my son, my third child, Alex. So it's quite a wonderful milestone to have all of you here this morning to witness my sharing of my journey. So here is me in 1966, 1 year after the independence of Singapore. That's my mom. She's passed away in 2015. I fondly, I really miss her. And, my mom, for some reason, always had very large expectations of me. So when they had this Chinese name put here, it actually means Xin Jing, which is to follow the route to Beijing. So I'm Hainanese, so I assumed we were from Hainan Island. And in those days gone by, people who wanted to serve the emperor or the government had to go all the way to Beijing to take, the very important exams and then hopefully join this to serve the emperor and the government. Yeah, so early days was really very happy actually, because my mom was a servant and we lived in some of the largest homes in Singapore around Holland Village, Oi Tiong Ham Park, Leiden Road, Bin Tong Road. But I never knew I was poor, because the houses we were living in were huge. I mean, obviously I was living in the servants' quarters, but there was a lot of love in the house, nothing lacking. And I think that formed my childhood. I always joke today that my dad and mom gave me a taste of the higher living, having lived in some of those big homes. Yeah. And then fast forward through my childhood, knowing that, I had to really do well because of my family circumstances. I never really had, my mom and dad never had to really tell me to study. I saw it that they worked really hard for their living and they had a lot of high expectations. So I did what I could. And I guess you could say the fortune teller had his trajectory a bit wrong, because I didn't end up in Beijing, and I ended up in Massachusetts in USA, at MIT.
Yeah. And you went on to represent Singapore as well in the SEA Games. And this sparked sort of a new venture for you in the non-tech sense.
Yes, well, actually, so I have to take you back a little bit. I started fencing when I was in junior college. I went to Raffles Junior College. I actually founded the fencing school in RJC. And I think you'll probably hear a constant theme is I like to found new things. And so through my life, I've always been founder. I think I'm unemployable, but I've been founding things. So that was the first fencing school in a junior college. And then when I went to MIT, I actually had an amazing time because I was on the varsity team and we trained actually 5 hours a day And then mind you, I was on a scholarship by the government from Singapore. And it was really hard to get A's at MIT. There is this bell curve, right? And there are really bright people there. So after the first year, I decided that, I'm not going to compete with these people. And I actually read a quote that I used to rationalize my journey forward by Mark Twain called, "Don't let school get in the way of your real education." And the other Asians or Singaporeans we had there were not many, but they were really studious. They spent all their time studying. So I spent all my time fencing, and I figured that I could get B's. So I did. And I had an amazing time. I did research work in the AI lab, worked on robots, worked on natural language processing, AI. Wonderful education. But fencing really formed a very big part. And as you said, when I came back after graduation, I represented Singapore at the SEA Games, 2 SEA Games, 1991, where I won a bronze individual. And 93 was really important because 93 was the SEA Games being held in Singapore. And the team here, you can see them, we very much wanted to win the gold medal for Singapore so we could sing Majulah Singapura and fly our flag. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we failed in our mission. We got a silver medal. It was quite a disappointment for us. I'm sorry, actually we got a bronze medal. I won an individual silver at this, but as a team we won a bronze. So right after that we formed the fencing school called Z Fencing, which still exists today and is still, training young people to become fencers. And our goal since 93 was to finish the business that we had started. So through the years, we have raised many champions, and let me try to think which year, about 5-6 years ago when we held the SEA Games in Singapore, many of the fencers who were groomed from Z Fencing, we actually won the gold medal, and it was really poignant time for me and my team. We all went and we sang Majulah Singapura, and we said, okay, at least mission accomplished for this one.
Brilliant.
And fencing has been a really big part of my life and my love because I've come to see fencing as more about character development. And at our school, we talk about honor, grace, and chivalry. Yeah. So it's always been a very important part of my life. I think one of my friends or my coaches is on the Zoom, and if he is there, I say, hi, Joseph. Yeah.
Your Catholic journey, you got baptized, not at the time you got married, but your Catholic journey really started when you married a Catholic girl, right, Gillian? Even though you didn't get baptized. Take us through that journey, the start of your Catholic journey, even though you didn't get baptized at a particular point.
Okay, well, that's my lovely wife. And
Gillian over here, is Gillian?
Yeah, she asked not to be highlighted. She's the star one. But my other good friend, her good friend from primary school, Marian, should be online, I think. And she introduced us when I came back and set us up on a blind date because she was going out with a classmate of mine, Patrick. So we met on a date. We went out, fell in love. And that was Risen Christ and all my fencers forming the arch. And I was doing RCIA, before the late Father Luazo has passed away. And to see whether I could convert to be a Catholic, to marry in a Catholic church. But when Father Luazo interviewed me at the end, so he said, so how, TK? I told him, Father, after 28 years of sin, I'm sorry, I'm not ready to convert. And he said, that's okay, take your time. So we got married in the church, thankfully. And I promised that we would practice at least being a good Catholic family, and all our children would be, raised as Catholics.
You have three children, Nicole, Julia, and Alex.
I
Alex,
do.
Alex, the future MIT grad, right?
I really don't know. Education has changed so much. Alex probably will drop out. He's declared his ambition is to be a gamer or YouTuber, somewhere around there. I don't think you need to go to school to do that. We'll try to help him along. Yeah, I have Nicole, she's 22. Julia, who's 17, and Alex, who's 10, and they all do fencing. Not so much because I want them to be champions, but I've always felt that, I took a lot away from fencing in terms of developing the person who I am and character. So I'm hoping that those values can be imbued in them and bring them through their lives.
One of the conversations that you and I have been having really is about competition and escaping the competition. Fencing is inherently competitive. Have you reconciled the two? Can one take part in a competition, but then still, draw out the good values and not the sort of the bell curve style of competition, which is to beat somebody else, the zero-sum style?
Dennis, that's a really sharp question, because I struggle with the competitive part of sport, but because in fencing actually is a really individual sport. On the one hand, you have a team, there's a team event, and then there's an individual event where your own team members can then become your competitors. And it's really difficult to, find a way to balance being a team and then being an individual. So it's I suppose it's in those struggles that really define who you are and what's important. Yeah, and so very much so at our school, we really always celebrate the efforts. We almost never celebrate the results because we feel that we don't have to. There'll be sufficient focus around that. And our job really was to create the conversation around, well done, great progress, awesome effort. And but I just wanted to say that there is a code I try to live that's also inscribed at Z Fencing, which is, if you really go back to what fencing is about, it's swashbucklers, it's about heroes, it's about knights, it's about musketeers. And that's what I really identify with for Z Fencing. So we have a code that we try to live with. It's called the honor above all, grace in victory or defeat, chivalry for all in need, one for all and all for Z. And I think that spirit is a lot more important than the mechanics of fencing. Fencing is just an excuse for us.
We have members of the audience who are raising their hands or asking questions. Feel free to write your questions in the Q&A box. And during this conversation, or perhaps after, we will get to it. Penny, I think you mentioned that you can't really hear us well. I hope the volume is okay. Perhaps Errol, you can guide us along if that becomes a problem. But moving on to a very critical moment of your life, the thing that you and I have in common, TK, is that we both broke away from our government scholarship bonds to pursue our startups. The difference really is that I did it at a time when it certainly wasn't taboo, not the most common thing yet still, but certainly wasn't taboo. You did it at a particular point in time when people didn't even, getting a government scholarship is like you just struck the lottery in Singapore, right? Take us back to that moment when you decided to leave the government. What did you see in this internet opportunity that, really went back all the way to your MIT days?
Wow. So, National Computer Board of the government offered me a scholarship to go study at MIT. And at that time, in the late 80s, I'm not sure whether getting the scholarship was harder or getting to MIT was harder, because Later, I realized MIT accepts maybe one candidate from Singapore for the undergraduate program every year at best. But for me, being in Singapore then and not having the family circumstances, getting the scholarship was ever more important. So what happened was I actually applied to MIT before I got the scholarship because I was very determined to go. I knew that I wasn't the brightest students at RI and RJC, and that I would have to have an ace in my sleeve, as they would say. So I just went ahead to apply to MIT. During the interview, when this huge panel asking me, so where do you want to go, Toon King? And I said, I would really like to go to MIT because what I like to study is computer science, and MIT is, very famous for it. And then they looked at me and they said, it's very difficult to get in. When I applied, I really didn't know, And I said, yes. And by the way, I've been accepted. And then there was a pin drop silence in the room. They asked me can you say that again? I said, I've been accepted. Knowing that would have increased my chances to be accepted with the scholarship. So the scholarship was really valuable to me. At that time, the tuition fees for MIT was 60 to 70,000 US dollars a year, including living. So my bond when I came back was over $1,000. And I worked for 3 years in NCB. I had a wonderful time. I was working on a project called IT 2000 that was mapping out how with networking technologies we could make our country intelligent. And that's actually where I got reconnected back to the internet when we were first using it as a research tool at MIT. And I just realized that I saw this exciting future, that with the internet, a whole new world could be opened up. And this was in 93 and 94, so it was an early time. So I decided that I was going to ask my boss whether I could break my bond and set up Singapore's first internet company. It was a scary moment, actually, but somehow I think, looking back now, it's just God's hand. There was a whole number of things that just led me towards there to set up Silk Road Ventures. One was when me and my co-founder, Xiaopin, both were scholars. So we applied to our boss to say, we like to break our bonds. Will you allow us? And he looked at us and he says, this will set precedents, And then it sat there for a month. For some reason, I had gotten a customer and we was doing something, and Business Times came up to us and wanted to interview us. So I did the interview, and then I realized, oh my gosh, tomorrow it's going to come out in the papers, and I haven't gotten approval from National Computer Board. So that night I was working late, and the CEO of National Computer Board was working late, and I walked into his office and I said, I have to tell you something. And he said, what is it? I said, tomorrow in the papers, there's going to be an announcement about my company called Silk Road Ventures, internet startup. He looked at me in silence for a while, and then he said, well, I guess then we'll just have to approve it. Yeah. And this was where Philip Yeo, the chairman of EDB, he was the founding chairman of NCB. So, he was very against scholars breaking their bond.
Yeah.
And a couple of years later, that whole parliament saga where Philip was embroiled in, and any scholars who broke their bond were featured on the front page of the Straits Times. Yeah, it's amazing that we set precedents, but he came out to explain later, Philip, he's been a great mentor for me actually, that we were not the kind that he was against. We had come back, we had served, but we found an opportunity and really wanted what we wanted to do was pioneer an industry in Singapore. Some of those folks never came back. So he felt very strongly that they had taken taxpayers' money and denied somebody else an opportunity. So with that understanding, I think we were quite okay with him. Yeah, quite Catholic with him.
Silk Root Ventures, when it first started, was the major brands, or rather the major institutions here, the incumbents, if I may say, in Singapore, were very much skeptical about it. In fact, some of them had, without mentioning any names, maybe some of them had deliberately tried to stop you. In fact, there was this idea of whether the internet thing was legal or not. Take us back to that founding moment and maybe the first 2-3 years. What was that like? How did that sort of take off?
When we formed the company, we borrowed our office in Z Fencing along Beach Road. So this is the original sign. Our fencing studio was on second story, so we borrowed the part of it. So in the day, it was Silk Root Ventures. At night, we would teach fencing. And that's how we kind of bootstrapped going forward. I made a presentation at the IT conference, and then a pretty prominent IT executive came up to me and whispered saying, "Hey, TK, this thing you're doing, it's great, but is it legal?" And I was really astounded for a while, like, oh, I never thought of that. But, because the internet actually violated at least three laws in Singapore: the public broadcasting law, the telecommunication law. I'm not sure what the third one was, but really there were major acts that the idea of content being regulated and centralized, right? So with the internet and the World Wide Web, you could actually be a publisher. And then second is the Telecommunication Act. You cannot hook up servers onto the internet in Singapore. So there was a lot of skepticism. In fact, I recall when we were breaking our bonds that one of our NCB directors, who was very well-meaning, and credit to him, they actually gave us a 2-year reprieve on the bond that we had to pay back. Collectively, me and Xiaopin, we owed NCB $400,000. That was a pretty big sum for two of us at 28 years old. And interest was 10% compounded every year. So it really is God's hand moving us to do it, because to have that liability on our heads was rather big. But he was very well-meaning. He said, TK, we're going to give you a 2 years reprieve, because just in case this internet thing is a fad, you can come back. So really, if I take you back to those days, some people are wondering whether it was just a fad, the internet, like some technologies. And some people were wondering whether it was legal. And so it was an interesting moment, the first 3 years, really for us going out there, trying to evangelize and develop enough business so that we could survive. And God willing, we actually did survive. We survived through our third year. And as you know, a lot of companies don't survive past their third year. I don't know what the rate, the statistics is, but it's really high. So we celebrated. And then we said, so what should we do going forward after 3 years? Because predominantly before then, we were building websites. Today, I think people say, oh, that's so easy. But in '94, there were barely any tools to do that. And we really would have to handcraft every website. So we built a lot of the major websites in Singapore, including DBS Bank, Tourism Board, the Visit Singapore website, SIA, EDB, and some corporate brands also. And kind of like if you think of the internet as the virtual space, right? And we were the developer. We built many of the new buildings. in this space. But we said we can't continue like that. So we started looking more deeply where the internet was going. And so this graphic here done by one of our graphic artists that really captured it all. We told the team that we're going to boldly go forward where no man has gone before on the internet. And so this moment was 97. And a project that we were working on called Asia Manufacturing Online really set the stage for that.
Yeah, Silk Root Ventures was essentially a holdings company that incubated and spun off other internet companies, including Advanced Manufacturing Online. And we'll get to that. That's a really interesting story. In fact, we were having a bit of an exchange about that just before this call. You really brought Singapore Inc. online, right? A whole bunch of companies, stat bots. You brought them into the digital world. That's what you essentially did.
Yes, I think in the first few years, we were quite a leader in that space. Being one of the early believers. So we built a team and brought a lot of Singapore Inc. online. But we knew that we couldn't continue to do that. We had to evolve the business, and we would have to build platforms. We actually used the word platforms then, which today is well-used word in the digital world. In those days, we were just making it up as we were going along. It was very hard to explain a lot of the things that we were trying to do. And there you go, AMO. And so we said, let's choose a vertical industry. And then we said, what's big in Singapore? We said, well, what's really big in Singapore is electronic and computer manufacturing. We are quite a hub in Asia. We later realized that 50% of the electronic manufacturing output of the world comes from Asia. And Singapore and the Economic Development Board had done a really good job of getting all those companies to headquarter their regional operations in Singapore. So the IT department, the data centers. So what we were imagining here, I'll tell you a little story how this became a big thing. So our goal now was to go from a publisher to bring Asia online to becoming Asia's largest e-commerce group. That was the 97 goal for Silk Road. And so what we did was, we looked at sector by sector. One of them was manufacturing, high-tech manufacturing. And so I went down to one of the potential customers. It was Matsushita Panasonic in Bedok. They had a huge manufacturing plant there. So we were in the procurement office with the procurement manager. And I said, there's this internet thing and we can connect your suppliers together so that you can communicate and send your invoices and orders electronically. This was 96, I think. And then we were talking, and then I looked behind. There was this dot matrix printer that was printing reams and reams of purchase orders for what they would be manufacturing on their factory line. So I said, what are you doing there? He says, oh, from our computer system, when we plan for all the manufacturing, we print out all of this, and then we fax it to the hundreds of suppliers all across the region. We wait for all those responses to come back. And then we have somebody to key them all into our multi-million manufacturing system. That was the moment that went boom. I says, oh my gosh, I think I can find you a better way to do this. And so we actually built the platform to enable them to link their manufacturing computer system through the internet, through AMO, to all their suppliers. And when we started doing that, we actually built a cloud-based solution. Then we didn't know how to explain cloud-based solution because that terminology did not exist either. Because in those days, you either sell software, right? And you load it up onto your big computer. There's no such thing as renting or today Google Cloud or Amazon Cloud. It really was a a very new thing. So we built our own data center, we built our software, and we enabled suppliers to link up with the manufacturers. Once we had Matsushita, we easily got Sony, then we got Toshiba, and then we got Apple, Compaq, HP, because it started to form a network.
Mm.
And we were starting to go, build a lot of traction. Finally, until we dominated in Asia. We had all the large high-tech manufacturing companies in our system and thousands of suppliers, many of them who not only supplied to, say, one of our customers, but also. And I always love to ask my engineer to turn on the computer, let me see the number of procurement orders that we were facilitating. And at our highest point, we were facilitating over $1 billion of orders a month between the manufacturer and the suppliers.
Mm.
And so that was really the start of something big.
It really is interesting to me because I think, as we had been discussing, it really creates the right question for a Singaporean tech entrepreneur to ask, which is, what can I do which will leverage off Singapore's competitive advantage, which will also differentiate me from someone in the Bay Area or in Boston or Beijing or wherever it is. It really gives, you really thought about how you can leverage off Singapore's particular position in order to build AMO. We have questions from Gwendolyn. I think your question will be answered later. Maybe we can jump to Wendy. She's asking, any advice for young people thinking of starting a side hustle? We detour a little bit from the presentation, if it's okay. What are some of the main challenges you face while building your startup? This is really in the early days of your journey. Would you have changed anything? Big question, changed anything you've done in the past?
So I think it's really important to, so the first question about side hustle, I think I encourage that. Sometimes it's much harder to take a big leap, and you're also discovering yourself, right? So it's good to do a couple of side hustles and find out what really works for you, and also actually what do you really care about? Because ultimately, I think the theme that I want to send across today probably is, we were joking before how Jay-Z says, do you, you really have to do you. You have to find what you really care about. Because the startup journey or any journey to do something great takes 10 to 20 years. You're lucky. Many fail. And time again, like religion, you really have to have faith and conviction. When everybody else says, give it up, join a company, get a stable salary, it's something you really need to care about. And for me, I guess what I really cared about then was, I never felt I left the government service. I've always felt like I was still an NCB officer, and my job was to find a way to help Singapore remain relevant and competitive. And if I could do that through entrepreneurism, that's what I felt Singapore needed, then I would go and do that. And that's what kept me going, through all the difficult times. I really wanted to pioneer a new industry that I felt Singapore had to succeed through the internet because of the limitations of our marketplace, our market size. Time and time again, all our entrepreneurs here will hit the same wall. Our market is simply too small to attract any serious funding. Most of the startups that happen here, I would say 95%, even if they're successful now, typically get acquired by American company and European company, and increasingly the Chinese companies, because we simply don't have the size to grow. And so the internet, for me, really represented the opportunity for us to break out of our geographical constraints. And it's not going to be easy. We have so many odds against us. The thing that going through those early years, the first 10 years, the thing that kept on ringing in my mind was going against all the odds, the status quo and all the odds to succeed. Any startup has a lot of odds, but a startup from Singapore trying to go global, I think it's multiplied many times.
And you were, you really became the poster boy for internet entrepreneurship, tech entrepreneurship at that time. All the media had covered you. Interesting enough, Philip Yeo became your chairman. He was your boss, and then he became co-chairman with you. Take us back to that moment, right? When it was really, you were flying high, it was really rocket ship stuff. How was that playing out in your head? Were you, being reported by the press all the time? Was there like a ego growing over there? How did you feel at that moment? You were accelerating so fast.
Those days were, as you said, Dennis, really felt like I was in a rocket ship. It was kind of like you were in control, but not in control. Things were flying off, and within 2 years, I think we were present in 10 cities across Asia. And then we were preparing to mount a campaign to go global by setting up our global headquarters in Silicon Valley. And we had 500 over people. The joke was some of the offices that we opened, I never stepped into the office before. People thought I was imaginary. They had to put a picture of me in the office in Korea because they said, yeah, that's the chairman, that's the founder. Because we were growing so fast, there were so many moving parts. So I always like to akin doing a high-tech startup as to like launching a rocket, Really, initially, it takes tremendous intensity to lift off the rocket. Many don't lift off, right? And then you have to fight against gravity. And as you going through gravity into space, actually most rockets have the nuts and bolts start to get loose and pieces starting to fly off. And if you're an entrepreneur, you get really scared because it's like, I hope there's enough things staying on for me to break out of gravity and into space, And so these days when I mentor, I work with founders of startups, I always say, it's okay, don't worry. Not everything is under control, And you have to feel very comfortable to be in that environment where everything seems to be like coming apart as you're trying to break out of the laws of gravity. It was a heady moment, Dennis. Those are my, I was 31, 32 then. I cannot imagine, I'm 54 now and I look back and I said, oh my gosh, what did I actually do? I think my maturity was not there. I was a very intense person. When staff came into my office, typically if it's a girl, they'll walk out crying because I was very tough on the business and we had to be, but really I didn't have that level of maturity and godliness to do things in the right way. I mean, this is only with reflection. And I think those days, it's very easy to smoke this vapor, right? If the press is celebrating you and people are celebrating you, you wonder, is it the result of yourself or something else? And it builds on your pride, And I'd like to talk about that later, but I think when I look back, it was dangerous times for me as a person.
And the importance of having good mentors, right? You had Philip Yeo next to you, and how that plays a part, and maybe we'll get into that. There are some questions coming in, I'll address them a little bit later, but really this was a time when you were flying high. Ministers were speaking to you. This was your office in Silicon Valley, where I think there was a story of you breaking the law here. you raised the Singapore flag. Apparently that wasn't allowed, but it really shows how you saw Singapore at the center of what you were doing, and I guess that really addresses in some way the question from Andy, who was asking whether you could have waited till after you're born to pursue this. But I think that you saw a particular opportunity, and timing was quite important here. And you're winning awards, invited to the Istana. This was the National Entrepreneurship Award in 2001. And really, you were about to reach the sun, right? You were preparing for a $1 billion IPO, and it seemed all set. Take us back to that moment when you realized that you were just about to list a $1 billion company. You're a Singaporean startup that had reached that top of that mountain. Take us back to that particular moment.
So in late 99, after having raised over 60 million of venture capital funding from Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, GIC, and some of the Silicon Valley companies, we moved our headquarters. AMO had become ECNet because we wanted, that was the product name actually, e-commerce net. So we wanted to become the largest B2B e-commerce network in the world. And we figured we could do that using the electronic manufacturing, high-tech manufacturing vertical as our first vertical. Kind of like how Amazon used books, remember? As their first product. For the B2B, business to business, the high-tech manufacturing, that means computers, anything that's electronic, that sector was several $1 trillion industry. And we really dominated because of this advantage, having coming out from Asia, where 50% of the manufacturing came from Asia, and Singapore being the hub. We just had this amazing advantage going into Silicon Valley and really mopping up every customer you can imagine. And that included Apple. And as I was preparing for this IPO of ECNet first, I was at that time the CEO and chairman and founder, but we felt that to manage such a big company, we should bring in a veteran CEO. In those days, in the 90s, the venture capitalist community felt that you need adult supervision. So that I would be chairman and founder and would lead in the product, but we need a CEO to run, a $1 billion valued company, right? And so we were introduced to a few candidates. One of the candidates, this is very interesting trivia for me, was the person who eventually would become the CEO of Apple, Tim Cook. Tim Cook in 1999 had just moved from Compaq to Apple. And he was asked by Steve Jobs to really get Apple's supply chain in order. Because actually Tim Cook was a supply chain expert. He was the SVP for global supply chain. And so I had 2 meetings with him, one dinner, one lunch in Cupertino. And he was very interested because he's never seen a company like this and playing in his space, supply chain management for high tech. So he was very interested, but in the end, he told me that he couldn't let Steve Jobs down. Steve had just brought him in to fix Apple, right? And Steve Jobs himself had just his second return to Apple. So, and you can really understand that. And I'm really glad he didn't join ECNet because ECNet did not succeed, but certainly he has succeeded, Tim Cook. But I guess that was a pretty close touch. I really admire Steve Jobs, so as close to Steve Jobs and Apple as I could have gotten. But we were preparing to go public. All the documents were actually ready. My CFO, who was a very experienced CFO for 2 NASDAQ listed companies, Bob Verhicke, brought me on the roadshow. You know, roadshow is you go across all of America to meet the bankers, the analysts, and everyone was saying they had never seen such a unique company that had come from Asia that had the chance to compete in Silicon Valley in America, and because of our natural advantage, the choice that we have made. And so we're all preparing to go public, and then in 01, 02, that was the dot-com crash over 3 years. And so if you look at this chart, we were ready to go in sometime in 2001. We had everything set up very nicely, but the market just kept on going down, down. It could not find its bottom. And when you look at this chart, this is the chart of the NASDAQ composite. It looks like, oh yeah, isn't it obvious it's going down? But you know, if you put yourself in a spot there, let's say the circle that's highlighted there, you think that right in the abyss, you see recovery, and you say, okay, we're ready to go. And then suddenly it goes down and goes up. It was really a very dark moment. Many people, I think more than 50% of the companies that were started during that period disappeared. And even companies like Cisco lost 80% of their market share. So that was really the low point. The high point was in 2000 when the composite was at 5,000. And then the lowest point was 2002 when it was 1,200. And you could not see daylight. And so I felt I had to do the responsible thing. I informed everyone that I do not see a way out of this thing. We don't know when this will recover. It kind of feels like today, you know, a little bit, and so we did the right thing. We shut down our companies properly through the process. By 03, we had closed everything. We gave back whatever money that we still had left. We felt that it was very unclear how things would go forth. And so that from 94 to 2003 represented my rocket ship ride as a startup. I guess God, I reflect back now, brought me to the high of that mountain and then brought me to the bottom, asked me to go down. And really that began more than a decade for me as to soul search what had happened.
I like that, TK. You described it very well. God brought you. I think you once said it to me as God bring you right to the top of the mountain. You saw the world and then brought you back down to earth. Interestingly, though, people walking in the wilderness wouldn't necessarily do things like bringing Ben and Jerry's to Singapore, and also building one of the biggest training fencing institutes in Singapore as well. You walked away from the internet though. There was this moment of, I suppose the word is a lack of clarity. You were unsure about what you wanted to do. How did you find your way back to where you are? Take us through that walk in the wilderness and where you ended up as recent as 5 years ago.
So it was 2003 when after I let go everyone and gave back whatever money we had, we had no outstanding liabilities. I wanted to really make sure we did it right. And you have to understand, we were quite a juggernaut by then. We were like 500 people, multiple offices, and doing this right was not an easy task. But I think really kudos to everyone in the team. We felt that we had to do it with a lot of responsibility and integrity as best as we can. I don't say we were perfect. We probably made some people unhappy or disappointed with us. In fact, I carry that sense of responsibility till today, Dennis. I felt I let many people down. I felt I let Singapore down. They had high hopes that what we were doing could really break the barrier for Singapore. I was hoping, if God willing, that I would be his instrument to do that. But he had other plans for me, I presume. And so that began a lot of soul searching from '03. I even read the Dalai Lama's book. He had a very popular book because I was searching for peace and happiness. So the Buddhist teachings were really focusing on those two concepts, those popular concepts of peace and happiness. And they taught things like, if you don't desire, if you don't compare, then you'll be at peace. Kind of like Zen, right? And I said, oh, that's pretty cool. That seems like a framework to live with, you know? And I wasn't doing anything, and I was spending all my time at home. And every morning when my wife was going to go out, I would say, hey, Jill, where are you going? Until she got fed up, she says, can you go and find something to do, please? You know? And, you know, for 2 years, '03 to '05, it was very dark moments for me. I can't even say I was, I think I was in a state of shock, denial, shock. Most people who had such a 10 years ride and then crashed would probably, you know, say they were very saddened, but I actually didn't know what state I was in. I could not articulate it for a long time. But I thought I'd get my butt in order. So I was looking through my journals and said, you know, I always write these journals, and I look back 10 years and I said, oh, there was one thing I really wanted to do when I came back from America was to bring Ben and Jerry's to Singapore. Because up to that point, Ben and Jerry's had not come to Singapore, and the only real ice cream we could enjoy in a store was Haagen-Dazs, right? So Jill and I one day was at Holland Village, the very big Haagen-Dazs store, right, in the corner. And then she walked out and she says, that was very unsatisfying. I said, you're right, dear. So I said, let me write to Ben and Jerry's. And actually, when I first came back, I faxed to Ben and Jerry's, say, hey, you guys are not here. I really enjoyed your ice cream when I was, you know, a student in Boston, in New England, where they had a very strong hold. And then those days when there was fax, they faxed back, great, TK, where's Singapore? Is it China? You know, there were these two hippies, you see. So this time in '04, when I wrote to them, it was email. And again, it seems like God's hand. They says, oh my, what perfect timing. We're actually thinking about launching in Singapore, and we're trying to look for the right person to you know, lead, to take this national franchise. So I think there were about 100 people who applied, some large F&B companies and some individuals who were crazy about Ben and Jerry's, right? There's a cult-like feeling. So I applied, and through like almost a American Idol process, and actually during that time, Singapore Idol was happening, the first one, I think. We had to go through a process of eliminations, until finally, after over 6 months, I was awarded the franchise. And it was really, for me, just to get back to do something, but also do something that I've always wanted to do, to bring Ben and Jerry's to Singapore. I can tell you, all the kids, nobody cared what I did in IT or in the internet. Nobody understood that. But I was the most popular guy from here on for about 10 years, bringing peace, love, and joy and ice cream to everyone. So we built 10 stores. I learned so much about retail, about F&B, about lifestyle business, about branding. You know, I had been dealing with a different set of people, right? In technology, it's really highly skilled people in, you know, and then when you work in F&B, generally, you know, it's a different skill. It's actually EQ. But I took a very important lesson from my 10 years in F&B. I realized that many people who go into this want to serve with their heart. But every day when they're serving the customers don't reaffirm back it to them. So it's like a bank account. I have a whole credit of wanting to make people and serve people well, but every day it's being minused away. People don't reaffirm it. And I realized that to do this right, firstly, the employer has to give a lot of love to the staff and a lot of trust. And so actually our company name that ran the franchise for Ben & Jerry's was called The Happy People. And initially it was meant to be The Happy Company. But I said, wait a minute, it's not the company that needs to be happy, it's the people that need to be happy. And so we build a real culture around making our employees happy people. And that really showed in the stores. We had people from Starbucks and McDonald's, the managers, bringing their staff over, their supervisors, and we would see them scolding their supervisor. You see, how come you cannot run the store like this and everybody's happy? I was chuckling away because I said, oh my gosh, if this is how you treat your people, then there's no way they're going to be able to give love to their customers. Yeah, so it was from high tech to high touch. Some people wondering what I was doing. My mother was actually very embarrassed for a while when I started Ben & Jerry's, because, you know, she wasn't educated, and her friends who said, hey, what is your son doing now? And she said, selling ice cream. So that didn't kind of go off well. And I had many people in the industry who had known me during the 10 years prior said, so what are you doing now, TK? I said, well, actually I'm building up Ben & Jerry's or running Ben & Jerry's ice cream. And then the next question that they will ask me is, so what else are you doing? Initially, I faithfully replied, and I thought it was a question, but I didn't realize that the real underlying question was, that doesn't seem like very much. So what are you really doing? You know, over and over again. Until it came to a point, I just didn't care anymore. And I said, when they asked me, I said, I'm not doing anything. And I just wanted to see their response, like how they could handle it, this awkwardness, because it seems like all of us are defined by the company we work with or what we do. And it was very uncomfortable for people to be in a position where you didn't do anything, that I was me, right? And it also showed like who were friends that really cared who you were, and who were people who wanted to be your friends because of what you were, you know? Yeah. But I don't blame anyone. I think it's just society. And it was a useful lesson for me, very much. And I remind myself constantly that no matter who we become, we always have to treat everyone as equals. And I try to do that very much, especially when I work with young entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah.
I try very hard to treat everyone as a peer, and also not think that I know more than them. In fact, because the world is truly changing so fast that the young are the ones that should lead the way.
And I think it's Trillian. So if I apologize if I mispronounce your name, who was making the point with a question about treatment of your employees and treating people equally, including on the topic of gender, and how that is very important and rightly very much part of the conversation today. You went through a very, very unique journey. You can describe it as a business journey, but it's also a journey of faith. And you learned this from one of your mentors: first believe, then understand. Take us through what this really means.
So during this period after the dot-com crash, I was very fortunate that Richard Lee, we did the deal. where we valued the company before we went public at about 145 million Singapore dollars. And we sold a sufficient stake for me to be, financially independent. And all the initial investors were all taken care of. Everybody, made a significant return for themselves. So I'm really happy about that. But something seemed very empty for me, even though financially I was fine. I mean, it's bittersweet, Dennis, because for most cases, if you exit at a valuation of 145 million, I think
Success,
right? But because we were bound for a $1 billion IPO, it then seems a kind of bittersweet. Yeah, and I don't mean that by being greedy, you just have aspirations and goals, right? And they always joke in sports that it's better to win the bronze than to win the silver. The bronze guy says, thank God I at least got a medal, Then the silver guy says, darn, I didn't get the gold. And truly, it feels a bit like that. So I was trying to come to grips with, so I studied the Dalai Lama, then another mentor called Philip Ng of Far East. I was serving on a few boards that he was chair of, and he asked me to join this group called the Alpha Group for lunch. And he had curated it with professionals and business people. So we had through a bunch of lunches, right? These business people or professionals would share their testimonies while we watched some videos and learned more about price. And I faithfully went through most of it. Sometimes halfway, when I went into my car, ready to go for the lunch, I would say, I'm so tired today, or I have something else important to do. Then I would message my dear wife, who is a born Catholic, Jillian. I said, dear, I'm so tired, I'm so busy, I don't want to go. Then she says, dear, the devil is at work. Don't let him tempt you. Then I said, okay, I'll go. So that really helped. Anytime there is something wrong, it helps me to say, the devil is trying to stop me. And that means we must be onto something good, so we must persevere. So I faithfully went through, he sent me a lot of books to read. I tried to understand. And I said, I just can't seem to cross this chasm, this gap from understanding to believing and embracing our faith. And then he shared his testimony that how he really came to Christ was when someone told him, first believe, then you will understand. And obviously that was, very not intuitive, right? For most of us who are trained logically, I'm a computer science engineer. So obviously it's very counterintuitive. But when I tried to really understand it, I realized at some point I have tried to understand as much as I could. And that religion truly is a leap of faith, which means you must believe. So I said, okay, let me try that. And this was also about the time when we were now in our 40s and our third child, Alex, was about to come. Now, obviously, if in your 40s, it's a lot more dangerous to have a baby. And some of the initial scans showed that Alex may not be normal. And it was a difficult moment. As Catholics, Jill would not abort for sure and not have anything intrusively done. So I guess at that point, I had to really ask God to show me the way. And I sat down in my study a few mornings and I said, God, if you're really there, and if I need a sign, this is the sign that I really need, to help Alex come out healthy. And with all blessings, Alex not only came out healthy, he's a very precocious kid. I'm pretty sure he will only last through PSLE because in school, the teacher says he talks too much and asks too much. I actually want to go to the teacher and say, and what's wrong with that? I said, because, but you know, you can't. And every day he tells me school is boring. I'm struggling to find a way for this kid, you know. But I really believe in it. So that helped, and that was coming to 2009 when Alex was born, and I had made this promise prior. So when Alex was going to be baptized, right? This was 2010. I asked Jill, Jill, when is Alex going to be baptized? And Jill caught it immediately. She says, why do you ask? I said, well, I figure it'd be a really nice thing if father and son could be baptized together. Mm-hmm. Immediately, she moved heaven and earth. She called the priest, she asked, then apparently, you know, my RCIA was done easily, I don't know, 10, 15 years before, right? So apparently you're supposed to do all this again, but it was God's hand. The parish priest approved. And so I was baptized in 2010. And so this is exactly 10 years that the first time I'm really sharing publicly with all my brothers and sisters here, my journey to faith. So I guess God works in amazing ways, right? He figured that, okay, TK, I've given you 10 years. It's time for you to do your good work of announcing the good news, right? And I was talking to Errol, the organizer, before, and suddenly saying how uncomfortable and nervous we are about sharing our faith publicly. I'm very comfortable of sharing about my startup story, but this is something very new. So I ask for everyone's prayer and blessing that I can, you know, hopefully do it right. So it really helped me to believe, then understand. And there's a couple other things I'll talk about, but please go ahead, Dennis.
No, thanks a lot, TK. And you know, you're a mentor to entrepreneurs, including myself. I'm blessed to have you both as a startup advisor, but really as a sort of a spiritual advisor as well, with your own story. And you're kind of and this is my words, nobody else said so, but you're kind of like the de facto chief technology officer of the Catholic Church at the moment, with your role in the Catholic Foundation, with the Archdiocese digital initiative. And this is really a very important time for the church as we accelerate to a digital world as a result of COVID. Take us through what is happening over there as well. Like, what are the challenges that the church faces? How can all of us in the Catholic business community, or just the Catholic community in general, play our part?
Right. So 2010, I got baptized, and that was sort of like, oh, I crossed the first finish line, and I didn't do very much after that, but just accepting Christ. And then in 2015, a dear friend of ours, Audrey Reuters, our parish is St. Ignatius, and she applied for me in a lottery ballot to make it to the Archbishop's retreat called the CER. And I was in CER batch 47, 2015, I believe, yeah. And so that was 5 years. Now, I had no education in theology, and I had no understanding of our religion. And so that 3-day retreat was really transformational for me and for many people who have gone it. And I really recommend for everyone who can go to go for it, because how do you say, the Archbishop, what I learned, and some of the questions I see here asking me, would I have been as intense and tough on people if I had my religion? So prior to that, I did not have our faith to guide us as a framework. I only had what I thought was the right thing, the honorable thing to do, right? More secular. And actually, if you go back to those early days without the faith, if you ask any of my staff, most of them, I think they will always come away to say that I really cared for them. And they knew it. They knew it. I was tough on them because I wanted only the best for them. So that trait never left me. It was me, but it wasn't centered around Christ. So when Archbishop in CR taught us, what I took away was, number one, that our religion was about love and unconditional love. I actually never understood, never knew the word unconditional love. Like, what does that mean? But having learned that, and I'm sure most of our audience understand that, unconditional love is to love people with no conditions for whoever he is, not because he doesn't meet up to your eyes, but he's living what God has planned for him. That was a really important point for me, because prior to that, I think I loved people, but I had an image in mind, what he should be, where he should become, you know. That clouded my purity of love. And that really impacted my relationship with my then teenager daughter, Nicole. That was our first child. And I really wish we all had this faith training and parental training before you have a child. And please, all of you who, like you, Denis, you just have how many months now?
3 months.
3 months, yeah. Go through this education, because we were doing a startup of Nicole with no training. And the other thing I learned from the Archbishop was the 7 sins, which I also was never educated on. So mind you, can you imagine how uneducated I was? And that pride was the worst sin. And you could almost say that the sin that I had sinned up to 35 to 40 was pride. I think because of my successes, right? And my secular way of thinking, I really felt that, hey, you know, your destiny is in your own hands. It's what you do to create and your own ability. So that in itself is pride, right? So I carried this cancer called pride, this toxicity. And when I saw Nicole, and she would come to this age where, you know, biker chic, she would wear torn jeans, midriff. She would go to church with us if she wanted to go. And it was just really troubling for me to say, oh my gosh, you are my daughter of, why can't you wear a dress or something and look proper, you know? And then she was to say, why can't you accept me for who I am, right? And it was just this ding dong. We had a very tough time together for many years, from the moment she was 12. She is highly independent, free-willed. Actually, I cannot blame anyone. She's like a replica of me multiplied by 3. So I cannot blame anyone, you know, rebel. And by the way, my mother, my late mother, was also a rebel, because when she got married to my father was a sailor cook. So he and all his brothers were on these big shipping lines. They were in Europe, and they would only come back once a year. My mother said, if you want to marry me, this was a long time ago, for a woman to say this, you drop anchor here. So his brothers got married and continued to sail and come back once a year to see the family. My dad had to anchor himself, find a job. He was a hospital attendant for 30 years at Gleneagles. He did his job faithfully every day to feed us. You know, it's a very quiet man. But my mother was a rebel, and actually our family house was in a village, in a kampong, and all the other wives faithfully stayed with the grandfather, the patriarch. But my mother told my grandfather, no, I'm going out to work, right? And again, she was a rebel, and I think it's in me, and I can see it in my daughter. So pride was having understood that pride is a sin, and the balance of and the combination of unconditional love, it really helped repair my relationship with Nicole. And also it really helped get me onto a nicer way with people today, you know, and not to judge and not to, in a way, manipulate. You give love because you want them to be some way. So that's not conditional. So these are terms I had never learned before prior to our faith. And so CR47, there was one important person I met there. I don't know whether he's listening in, Mr. Willie Cheng. You know, put your hand up, Willie. So he also was going through the retreat, and Willie was the founding managing director of Accenture. So we knew each other. He raised his hand, great. But he was about 10 years older than me. So he's like a big brother. We all respected him. So he asked me, Toon King. I said, yes, Willie. What are you doing? So my usual, I said, nothing. And he says, come. And he asked me to help in Catholic Foundation. And so by becoming involved with Catholic Foundation, I got to try to understand better what Archbishop and Archdiocese and our church was doing. Archbishop had just become ordained in 2013, and he had a pastoral vision for our church. You know, and then I to be visionary, evangelistic, and missionary. So I went to study, you know, typical problem solver. I went to study what's the problem, and I realized that our church has not been growing for 18 years. In fact, not only has it not been growing in terms of parishioners, we're actually declining. We're declining maybe about 2% every year. But if you take that over a 25-year, one generation, obviously there'll be new converts, but the people coming in is lesser than the people exiting. And if you work out the numbers, it almost, think of this picture like the iceberg. The icebergs are melting, and then at some point they'll break away. And then things will accelerate. Actually, our faith, you can see already in Europe and some bits in America, but the disease is throughout. We really have to re-evangelize ourselves and grow. So the primary thrust was, how can we grow again and not just be a maintenance church? And one of those things is to be able to evangelize. And so today, much as I was very reluctant to do this talk, I felt it was my responsibility to heed the call, right? To try to evangelize. If we can affect one person today, some way to strengthen your faith or to get somebody else, we can't do everything. So I told myself, if I can mentor 10 people, right? And but very deeply, first because of their startup, but maybe hopefully because of how they see what I do. Maybe it may inspire one of them to take on our faith if they've been on the fence. So that's really the startup that I am doing, right? So give me some affirmation, everyone. If I've helped along till now, just raise your hand. I saw Willie, so hi, Willie. Okay, I have. Oh, thank you. Okay, yeah.
Now it's all blocking my screen.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, God bless all of you. So, and then last year, you know, being a technologist, I realized, oh my gosh, we are so behind our church in all these digital systems, right? And our next generation is all very digital native. We're going to continue to lose people if we don't build for the church the foundation of a new digital church where we can continue to connect and personalize the journey. So that's really the thrust of the Digital Church Initiative that, again, I don't know why God's hand put it into my lap. I'm the most unqualified CTO, CIO you can imagine, you know. But I've been asked somehow to do this, and I hope I can serve everyone well. One of the critical projects we had to really fire up quickly was the Mars system. And that was really not in the plans of the digital church because COVID struck, and to be able to resume mass, we had to register people and manage the allocation, right? Never in our lives did we think we had to register and book a slot for mass, you know. But God was magic at work. We were talking about last year about building a small digital team. There were a few volunteers that we were working closely with. And when in February, March this year, when COVID hit, suddenly we had really to come together to build mass. And with the support of all the parish people and the archdiocese, we managed to bring it up in about 3 weeks. And today it supports about 80,000 parishioners going online, 50,000 bookings a month. And I have to admit that it's not the most sophisticated system, but given the time constraint and literally one technical person, I was really the product manager, and then there was a UX guy and someone support. Literally, that was it, you know, to build this system. Thank you everyone for raising your hands. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you so much, DK, for sharing your story, and everyone who commented and you know, gave your affirmation, from Penny, Philip, Yvonne, Lydia, everyone else. I'm sorry if I didn't get to you or your questions, but I hope that you guys keep in touch with DK, with all of us. Meanwhile, thank you so much, DK, for again sharing your story, and I think that you inspired more than one. I would put it that way, even though that was just your goal. Maybe I can hand it back to you, Errol, and we'll wrap it up from there. And thank you everyone for joining today.
Okay, thanks a lot, TK and Dennis. That was inspiring. We got a lot of positive reactions from the audience. And last but not the least, do help us with any love offering that you can make using these various methods, bank transfers or pay now, using our UEN number or scan to pay, and then checks, of course, are also accepted. So with that, I hand you back to TK for the closing prayer.
So I wanted to share this part by this biblical scholar, then I'll end with the prayer. It says, we are conditioned by our whole inherited cast of mind and our education to look for political, social, and economic causes of the rise and fall of nations and empires. The Bible would have us reform our thinking and seek the cause of things in the moral and spiritual realm upon which all else is consequence. To the Bible, history is the arena of moral decisions, moral conflicts, and moral consequences. The world's greatest problems are hence not material, but moral. And this, brothers and sisters, is hopefully the next part of my journey. I've tried to solve all problems with strategy, business, technology. I will now learn to believe and try to come to grips that actually all our problems are moral. So, Father God, may I have a mind that recognizes that the great issues of life are a matter of morality, and give me, I pray, a love for righteousness that characterizes every part of my life. I ask this in Jesus' name, amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Peace be with all of you. May God bless you eternally.